All right, so we've done order of operations. What's going to be different today is we're going to add in integers, which means we will have negatives. At the top of the page, just sort of on the top edge, I'm going to write out my order of operations. PEMDAS or PEMDAS, depending on how you do it. I like to put the M and the D together, A and the S together, because remember, multiplication and division goes from left to right. Addition and subtraction goes from left to right, and they go together in the same step. All right, so if we look at our examples, on number 1, I don't have parentheses, I don't have exponents. That means I can skip the P and the E and the PEMDAS and go right to multiplication and division. You want to start with whatever multiply or divide you have going on the very left-hand side of your problem. So I have -7 times 4 over here on the left-hand side. If I have different signs, a negative times a positive, what sign will my answer have? Yes? A negative. Because if they have the same signs, it's positive. If they have different signs, it's negative. So that's going to be -28. Now I want you to go ahead and rewrite +8 divided by 2 on your paper. So you write down the part that you changed, but copy down the rest of your problem. That way you won't get confused. All right, so we did some multiplying. There's still a divide over here that we need to do. So I need to take 8 divided by 2, and those are positive, so that would just be +4. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy down the plus and the -28. And I could have done both of those in the same line if I'd been thinking about it, but that's okay. Now I have -28 plus 4. So we have to think about all of our methods we have for adding integers. We could think of it as 28 red chips and 4 black chips, or 28 worms facing 4 spiders. Definitely the worms would win. There's more negatives than positives. When they duke it out, how many would be left? Yes, Silas? 24. So we're going to have -24 for the answer. So really what I did in my head was I took 28 minus 4 to get 24, but I remembered that there are more negatives than positives, so the negatives sort of win that battle, and it becomes out -24. Okay, so let's look at number 2. What's the very first thing I need to do on number 2? Go ahead. Parentheses. So inside the parentheses I have 3 plus 2. So inside those parentheses, I have 5. Now there's a squared on the outside of the parentheses, and what that means is now that is on the 5. So that's the E from PEMDAS is exponent. So I have to do that next. And you can leave the parentheses on there or take them off and just make it 5. If this were a negative number, we would need the parentheses on there, so I just usually leave it. So this would be 5 times 5. So what would that be? Brian?
25.
25. So I'm going to write down 25, and then I have times 6 and minus 1. All right, so what comes next? Go ahead.
25 times 6, which is 105.
It's not 125, 150. There you go. So you could count by 25. So 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150. Or if you don't know how to count by 25s very well, you could just take 25 times 6 over here the long way and get 150. So now our only step left is to take 150 minus 1. Addition and subtraction are always lost. So 149 is the final answer. So this is the same thing we've been doing. Some of these will have some negatives in them and some of them will not. There'll be a mixture. We're not putting in decimals or fractions yet. It will happen, but not yet. All right, so let's go down to number 3. There are no parentheses, so we jump to what? Exponents. Good. So I have 5 to the 3rd right there. So I have to think about 5 times 5 times 5. So 5 times 5 is 25. Then I have to take it times another 5. What is it? It's 125. So I'm writing this out the long way just so you can see. So this part right here becomes 125. Nothing else has changed. So I'm going to go ahead and just rewrite everything else that was in the problem. Because what I did is now I have a new order of operations problem, and I need to figure out what is going to happen next. So I didn't have parentheses, we did exponents. What's next?
You do 2 times 4.
2 times 4, because we need to do multiplication and division before addition and subtraction. So 2 times 4 is 8. Then I have minus 125 and plus 3. Here's where people make mistakes, okay? When we do addition and subtraction, if we think about PEMDAS, addition and subtraction go from left to right. That means I have to start on this side and work my way over here, because all that's left is addition and subtraction. That means I need to take 8 minus 125 first. Using normal arithmetic, I can't take 8 minus 125, but we have a trick to change it. What's the trick? CC, keep, change.
I was about to say.
So we don't have any negatives here, but it is subtraction we can't do normally. So I could change this to 8 plus negative 125. And think about this then in terms of our integer rules. 125 is a lot bigger than 8. And because these have different signs, I need to find the difference between them. So 125 minus 8, 5 minus 8 I can't do, so we borrow from the 2, make it 1, carry the 1 to over here to make it 15. 15 minus 8 is 7, and then bring down the 1 and the 1. But remember, there were way more negatives than positives, so it's going to be negative 117. And then I still have plus 3. So I just did this part to get the negative 117, and then I have to add 3. Now, really, we're going to think about subtraction because these have different signs. This is like 117 worms lining up against 3 spiders, those brave little spiders. The 3 spiders will kill out 3 of these worms, but most of them are still going to be there. So I'm going to take the 117 and subtract 3 to think about that, and then my answer is going to be negative. There's still more worms than spiders, if you want to think about that analogy that we used.
Spiders should win.
They can't, there's not enough. Alright, so let's go ahead and...
What if they're Goliath 3?
Remember, we're not doing any extra talking today. Alright, so that was number 3. So you can see how this is different from what we did in the last lesson. There are some negatives showing up. We have to think about keep, change, and how to multiply and divide with negatives. So let's go on to number 4. Alright, so on number 4, I have 8 times 4 minus 5 to the third plus 3. So if we're thinking PEMDAS, we have to start inside the parentheses. Well, inside the parentheses, I have 4 minus 5. Using normal arithmetic, I can't do that, but I could think of it as 4 plus negative 5. So I'm just going to write that up above the problem and then focus on what we're doing. So what would go in my parentheses? What is 4 plus negative 5? Go for it.
It's negative 1.
Negative 1, good. And that's to the third and plus 3. So I can't take negative 1 times 8 and then take it to the third. That would not be the order of operations. The next thing that we need to do is negative 1 to the third. Now, when you have a negative number being raised to a power, and it was in parentheses, meaning what that whole thing's being raised to a power, that means we're going to have negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1. You want to think about this carefully. So negative 1 times negative 1, that would be same signs. That would come out positive 1. Then I have to take it times negative 1 again, and it's going to come out negative. So this is going to end up being negative 1. And I can take the parentheses off there if I want to, or I could leave it in parentheses if you like to keep this symbol separate from that symbol. Sometimes they'll do that. But when you have a negative raised to a power, you really have to think about what the sign is going to be. All right, so then we have to do multiplication and division next. So 8 times negative 1, what would that be? Okay, you've answered a lot. Somebody else. Go ahead. Negative 8. And then we're going to add 3. So negative 8 plus 3. would be how much? Braden. -5. So -5 will be our final answer. So be careful with your order of operations. Be careful with your negatives. You have to use all of those integer rules that we learned about, how to add and subtract them, how to multiply and divide them. And you have to think about exponents, which is why we did all of that before we got into order of operations. Okay, let's look at number 5. On number 5, I have brackets and parentheses. Where do I start? What's my first thing? Okay, the innermost grouping symbol. She's right. So that'd be the -5 plus 3. So what is -5 plus 3? Yeah, go ahead. -2. So I'm going to replace what's in those parentheses with -2. And I might go ahead and just leave the parentheses on that for a second, because inside the brackets I have 4 and minus still in there, and that might help me keep track of everything. It's important that you keep writing out everything that's not changed so you don't lose anything. So the only thing I changed was that I took -5 plus 3, changed it to -2. I copied down everything else so that I don't get confused on the next step. Now, I need to finish out these brackets. I have 4 minus -2. So how do I do that? What's the rule when you're subtracting with negatives? Keep, change, change. So I'm going to keep the 4, change this to plus, and change that to +2. You can also think of these two negative signs as coming together to make a plus sign. Sometimes people use that as a way to remember. And now I just have regular old 4 plus 2. I'm still working on the parentheses step. These brackets count as parentheses. I have to finish everything that's inside there before I can do anything else. So 4 plus 2 is just 6. And you could take the brackets off at that step if you wanted to. And then I'm going to have -8 times 6. So in different signs, what's my sign on my answer going to be? It's going to be negative. It's going to be -48. Good. So parentheses, exponents, multiply and divide from left to right, add and subtract from left to right. All right, on number 6, there are parentheses, but is there anything to really do in there? It's just -7. So these are not grouping parentheses, it's grouping a bunch of operations. This is just making sure you know it's plus -7, like they sometimes will do in a problem. So I don't have anything to do in those parentheses. I can just leave that. So what's next after parentheses? Go ahead. Exponents. So I have this exponent right here, 2 to the 3rd. So that'd be 2 times 2 times 2. So 2 times 2 is 4, times another 2 is 8. So I'm going to replace that number. I'm not going to change anything else yet. I'm going to rewrite all of this, because otherwise I might get confused. Let me get this sort of centered on the screen here. All right, so there wasn't anything to do in the parentheses. We did exponents. What's next? Or did you have a question? Okay. So what's after exponents? Go for it.
Multiplication and division.
Multiplication and division. Do I do this multiplication before I do this division? No, we have to work from left to right. So I have to take -16 divided by 8 first. What would that be? What's -16 divided by 8? Go ahead.
-2.
-2. So this part right here comes out -2. I still have times 8 and plus -7. So everything that I haven't worked with yet, I'm just going to copy back down so I don't get confused. All right, and then -2 times 8 would be what? Go for it.
-2 times 8 would be
-16, and then I'm adding to that -7. So you could take those parentheses off at any point if you wanted to. It's just sort of keeping this negative separate from the plus sign. If I'm adding a negative and a negative together, what am I actually doing? Just adding the numbers. I'm adding 16 and 7 together because I'm just going to get more negatives. It's like we have worms and they don't eat each other. They just have a big old party. So 16 plus 7 is 23. So it's just going to be negative 23 because we're just having negatives and more negatives. Red chips and more red chips, or worms and more worms. Nothing's going to cancel out on that one.
What if there's cannibals in the party? Rodrigo.
Okay. All right, so let's go down and look at a story problem. So we talked about this a little bit this morning already, that one of our mathematical practices is being able to critique someone's work. We're going to do that again. Rodrigo performs the following computation, 3 plus 2 times 7 minus 6. His answer is 29, so he got 29. Explain how Rodrigo obtained his answer. Okay, so we're going to have to figure out if he did it right or wrong. It's going to say, is Rodrigo's answer correct? If not, what is the correct answer? So I would first think about what should you do first. Go ahead. Multiply, because we don't have parentheses or exponents. So you should do this part first, which would be 14. That'd have 3 plus 14 minus 6. And then I should go ahead and go from left to right. 3 plus 14 is 17 minus 6 would be 11. So I'm going to answer part B first. So this is the correct answer. Is his answer correct? No, he was wrong. So we need to figure out how he got 29, though. I think that's harder than figuring out that he's wrong. It's figuring out how he got 29. So let's look at it and try to figure out what he could have possibly done first. What do you think, Jaden?
He could have done. Oh, I have an idea. Minus 6?
He could have. I don't think that gets us. What do you think?
I think he did 3 plus 2 and then multiplied it by 6.
So he did 3 plus 2 and got 6, then took it times 7 minus 6. That'd be 40.
No, 5.
Oh, it'd be 5. You're right. 3 times 2 is 5. So that'd be 35 minus 6. I think that's what he did. So he added before multiplying would be what he did. He added the 3 and the 2 together first, and he got the wrong answer. This is why the order of operations is so important. Everybody needs to know what is the correct order for doing the math when we write it down like this. That way we're all coming up with the same answer. Okay, so this very last problem is just really big. So remember just to go through your steps. Are there any parentheses? No, so we can skip that. Are there any exponents?
Yes.
Yes, there are. I've got 7 squared right here. That would be 7 times 7. What is 7 times 7?
49.
49. So I'm going to write 49 down here. I'm just going to go ahead with this first step, even though this is a gigantic problem. I'm going to go ahead and just rewrite everything because otherwise I'm going to get confused. All right, so after we do parentheses, exponents, what comes next? Multiply and divide from left to right. So I'm not going to do this 3 or the plus. I'm just going to copy that down. And then I have 4 times 5, which would be 20. I'm going to write that down. And then even though this is a big old pain in the butt, I'm just going to copy everything else down. Well, the thing is, you could do 4 times 5 is 20, and then divide by 2, and then times 3. But a lot of us, when we try to do that without writing down steps, are going to get confused. Some of us tried last year. It didn't work out well. So I'm just going to do this in pieces. Because there's so many in sort of the string, multiply, divide, multiply, it's going to be hard to do that all in one step. We could go ahead and do this one over here that's by itself if you want to. 6 divided by 3 is 2. The reason I can do that now is because it's separated by some addition and subtraction. I know that's not going to go in with this multiplication and division I'm doing over here. I'm still not going to do the 3 and the plus yet. I am going to take 20 divided by 2. What would that be? 10. And I'm going to go ahead and write down the times 3. We're getting much closer. I only have one multiplication left. So remember, you have to go from left to right. This little string of multiplication and division that's all together has to go from left to right. So now I have to take 10 times 3, which is 30. And then we can do all of the addition and subtraction. So 3 plus 30 is 33. Then I have to subtract 49. And then I have to add 2. So 33 minus 49 is not one we can do with regular math. We want to keep change. So keep the 33, change it to addition, change it to negative 49. Or you could do that mentally if you wanted to, but I like having it on the paper. So I have different signs, some spiders and worms. We got to figure out, it looks like the worms are going to win. We have to figure out how many are left standing. So over here, I'm going to subtract that really quick, so that would give me negative 16. And then I have to add 2. So I have to think about subtracting 2 from 16, which is 14. And my final answer, way at the bottom of the page, is negative 14. It's still just order of operations, but you got to pay attention and keep writing out your steps.